And we are live. Hello and welcome to Fermenting Opinions. I'm your host, David Papide. James McVeigh is not here with me right now. And we are Fermenting Opinions, the podcast and YouTube show, in search of a more palatable political ferment. And here with me tonight, I have Chris, Haley, and Melissa. And we're going to talk about what's going on in Texas. We're going to talk about a couple of church-state separation issues. Starting off on Monday on the podcast, we had covered the case of the appeals court decision of Kennedy v. I think Bremmerton, which is a school district, Washington State. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. But just to briefly go into what that is, there was a football coach who was going out after games. He would go out onto the 50-yard line and he would take a knee and he would pray. And this was an issue for a lot of people, and it's an issue for me that anyone should do that in that capacity. And what it ended up being is that he did not get his employment contract renewed, which is in teacher land is sort of the equivalent of being fired. And he sued, and his request for injunctive relief was denied, and then he appealed it to the Ninth Circuit, which is known to be like a little bit more liberal as far as I understand, and they upheld it. And there were some people who thought that was a bad decision and that his religious freedom rights were being obstructed by being prohibited from praying in such a manner. But the court said no, and I think it's in the process of being appealed again to the Supreme Court. So there's an interesting confluence of issues of, was this really a constitutional thing for him to do, or is it going to come down to do the originalists on the court who are holding a majority, are they going to decide that yes, it is constitutional? And is that really how we interpret laws, by sort of majority opinion of the political persuasions of the people who are on the Supreme Court?
Well, it is what constitutional?
His behavior, in this sense, talking about, is he just exercising his First Amendment rights by going out and praying? Is that considered? There's a variety of smaller factors that sort of lead up to this. There's a chain of events that he used to lead his teammates in prayer in the locker room. He was told he couldn't do that anymore. Then he went out and started praying on this field, and the players would come and join him for prayer, and he would give sort of inspirational speeches. They would invite the opposing team to come and pray with them. And it turned into, in pretty much every case, a big spectacle. And the reason it's a church-state separation issue is because, well, there's a couple different tracks that you can take with it. The one that you have a government employee on basically government property endorsing a specific, a sectarian point of view, essentially, that you're saying that me as the coach who's an employee of this school district, and I'm endorsing this particular faith. I'm saying something very clear about what my values are and what my beliefs are, and the students around him and the attendees at the field are being made very aware of what that is. And to me, that's a violation, because that ends up being government having the effect of appearing that government is endorsing this one particular worldview.
I think that's way, way, way too big of a stretch. I don't know why. I don't know how the language of the Constitution isn't very clear here. And see, here's the problem. I get that the Constitution, the purpose of the Bill of Rights was to prevent the tyranny of the majority, but now we really are sort of having the tyranny of the minority. The fact that this man can't go out on the football field and pray, which is in essence telling him the only place that you can pray is privately and out of sight, certainly is a violation of not prohibiting his freedom of religion. This to me, of course, it's the Ninth Circuit and they're wacko liberal anyway, but I think that this is just a huge stretch. And I don't think the Supreme Court is going to uphold it if it makes it that far. I just, the whole praying with the team, I get, leading a prayer as a teacher or a coach or what have you, I get, but this is just absurd. I mean, how does this in any way, shape, size, or form affect your ability to be an atheist or to be secular.
Well, how is it different than those other two examples you just said that you were okay with?
Him walking out in the field and praying privately, he's not leading anyone in prayer.
You were just explaining facts so that it wasn't private. I'm just wondering how him going after a game to the 50-yard line with a group of people and leading a prayer is different than leading the team in some prayer before they go out on the field, which you're okay with.
He is not saying to the team, now bow our heads and let's pray together. He is, as an individual, going out in the middle of the football field and praying, and if people choose to join him, they're doing so freely. There's a huge difference. There's a big difference between people being led in prayer by a leader versus people gathering of their own independent volition, no matter where it is, and praying corporately. Those are two very different things.
There's 2 points I would respond to that with. The first point is that students and other members of the team would only come out onto the field and pray when he was doing it, because there was a period of time where he was asked to stop, and he stopped for a while, and then he started doing it again. But when he stopped, people were not coming out on the field to pray. They were coming out on the field to pray when he was coming out in the field to pray, so that it ended up being his sort of de facto leading this prayer of students. And the other prong of that, the other point I would respond with is that it's in many regards seen as coercive. That if you are a member on his football team, and if he wants to go out and pray, and everyone else is going out to pray, and you're the one dude who's going to still sit on that bench and not come out, is that not, separating yourself and sort of outlining yourself to be ostracized potentially?
Yeah, there's a few. You're making some assumptions. First of all, was there anyone on that team who said, "I don't want to pray and I feel coerced to pray"?
As far as I know, I don't know what the individuals players had to say. Their minors won. I don't think it was particularly reported on if anybody had a dissenting opinion. But that's part of the problem, is if somebody does dissent, are they perhaps too afraid to say so because they don't want to stand out, because there are other cases where there is some kind of school prayer or Bibles are being held out in school, and if someone objects to it, they're afraid to say anything, and this is the coercive effect.
I mean, not just that, we also don't know how many of those kids would have gone out to the 50-yard line and prayed of their own volition had that guy not gone out there.
Well, so, right. Well, actually, we do know that because the number is 0.
We also don't know that other fact. It's just.
But you are bridging the fact. You're making a very large bridge here, saying that no one prayed without him. People prayed with him, so they must feel coerced. Alexa's talking.
The jump that I'm making is that there were kids who were going out to pray because this dude was going out to pray at the 50-yard line, and if that's not okay, with a coach before the football game, I don't see what difference it makes if it happens before or after the game.
Because you're comparing two different things. If the coach before the game said, "We're going to kneel in the end zone if you want to and say a prayer. If you don't, fine," or even let's make it even more innocent, because as I understand, if he kneeled in the end zone by himself and people kneeled with him, there is no difference. But when I played football,
group prayer, it's in the locker room before the game starts, or it's at the 50-yard line after the game ends. I just don't see that much more of a difference.
But even that aside, how does this not run counter to the free exercise clause? I mean, it says very clear: they'll make no establishment of religion or prohibit the free exercise thereof. Sounds very clear to me that we're making a lot of assumptions about kids being coerced and all this sinister stuff.
Well, I think that we're all, understand that government employees shouldn't be leading, a group of kids in prayer before a football game. The separation of church and state. I just don't see how there's a difference whether it happens before the game or after the game. And
here's the problem. How far is too far? I mean, here's the problem, is that if you begin to impinge on his right to pray, That's no better than him impinging on your right to not pray.
Well, hang on. I guess I would say that, almost just like, public gathering kind of things, that there are time, place, and manner restrictions that are considered
on free
reasonable.
speech. On speech.
Yes, on free speech.
Yeah.
Like you can't, you can't
We're not
yell
talking about speech. We're talking
fire
about
in a movie theater kind of thing, right? We acknowledge that there are lines drawn somewhere with regards to a government employee in a public school setting that is whether or not it's actually religiously diverse. In this case, it actually is religiously diverse. That to me, the reading of the Constitution is that you're to remain neutral. Because
that's not
because
the free
not
exercise
remaining
law
neutral,
says, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
Right, and I'm saying that there are reasonable restrictions to that, because if I'm an atheist and I work in an educational setting, if I were to express my beliefs and encourage people to also be atheists who are my students, and if they're beholden to me and I have authority over them, if they're a strong Christian, are they not going to be a little bit afraid that I'm going to look at them as a little bit less? If their grade is going to be affected by my opinion of them, are they going to be afraid to come to me with issues? This is where the coercion comes in.
That's not the strongest point. It's just like,
it's not
does
the
it
strongest
make
point, but it's a
someone
point.
with a different faith uncomfortable with you having power over young minds to then, be able to very persuasively pontificate, to push your atheist beliefs or to push your Christian beliefs in a public setting funded by the government. And we've all sort of concluded that, we wouldn't want David to, hold big atheist meetings, and the same thing follows with Christian meetings.
Okay, so where would you be okay with this coach praying?
Well,
he can pray on his own damn time.
There was two.
No.
Hang on.
There's nothing in the Constitution that says that you could exercise your religion on your own damn time.
Well, hang on. He was offered. There were some mitigating circumstances here that he was offered both the opportunity to pray after the game if he went inside into like a classroom in a private setting where he wasn't praying publicly, but he was praying, and that, or he could wait for everyone to leave the field, and once the stadium was empty, the Friday Night Lights, once that went down, that after everyone was gone, he would have been allowed to pray. And I also think
it's a big point that he wasn't fired. Like they didn't renew his contract.
Well, that's the same thing. I mean, first of all, let me be clear. The employment piece of it is a little different. Okay. I think that the employment piece is, being more libertarian. Just, I happen to be, I don't know. Some days I'm a little left. Some days I'm a little right. It really depends on who I'm talking to. If the school district chooses not to renew his contract, I'm not sure that I want to wade into that. I'm not sure that I want to conflate these two things, which I realize that's what the court case did. I think that as an employer should more or less have the right to employ somebody at will. I mean, there's certainly, you shouldn't be able to fire someone because of their skin color and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But there may be more here that we don't know. I mean, there may be a lot of things. The employment piece of it for me, I don't feel quite as up in arms about. My issue is that, I understand that in a predominantly Christian nation where, a vast majority of what you see and hear has some Judeo-Christian message, it's hard to be an atheist or a non-Judeo-Christian person. The problem I see, though, is if we swing the pendulum the other way to, where secularism really begins to infringe on people's rights to freely exercise their religion, that's just as unjust. That's just to me just. That is unjust also. So to tell a coach or a teacher, you may not lead your students in prayer, is fine. To tell a coach you may not pray where people can see you, to me, infringes on his religious rights. Because as a Christian person, there's nothing about praying that I feel like I should have to do in private. Now, my personal view is prayer shouldn't be a spectacle. You shouldn't use prayer to draw attention, which probably is what this guy was doing. But I should, if I want to stop in the middle of Walmart and say a prayer and people happen to join me, I should be able to do that. If I want to stop in the hall of the high school and say a prayer and people join me of their own free will, I ought to be able to do that. Just like if you want to stop in the middle of the hall of high school and not say a prayer, you should be able to do that. And if you feel uncomfortable because I'm praying, that's kind of on you, not on me.
Well, there's two ways I would respond to that. First of all, as a Christian, the Bible verse here is Matthew, I think 6:5 and 6:6 about, the hypocrite is the one who's praying on the street corners, praying in public, and he receives his reward for doing that because he's getting attention. And it says to go into your room and close the door and pray in private, because you're doing it to be in relationship with your God, your Lord and Savior. And so when you're doing it, to me, it automatically seems a little bit disingenuous. Maybe it's not. Maybe he's very sincere and he just, he wants to show his faith to other people.
I'm going to guess there's some exegesis with that passage that you could go into with theologians. There's probably way more to it than just don't pray in public there. I'm not a theologian.
I mean, the nuance there is don't pray to make a spectacle out of it. I think even as an atheist, I understand
though that this guy going to the 50-yard line praying, maybe it's a spectacle, maybe it's not.
Well, it's a 50-yard line.
You're not sure if this dude going out to the 50-yard line at a football field after the game is any kind of speculating maneuver. Like, you're seriously saying that? I just want to make sure.
Well, first of all, I don't know this guy. I don't know his intentions.
Yeah, so, no, that's fine. But the 50-yard line?
Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know this man. I don't know his intentions.
All right.
But
that's how you're holding it.
That aside, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to. There's no religious parameters like that. The Constitution doesn't say you can only practice Christianity according to verses of the Bible. It's just religion in general.
No. I mean that's not a legal argument. That's a doctrinal argument that essentially if you were someone who's professing this version of Christianity, shouldn't that tell you not to be praying as a spectacle? But again, that's not a legal argument at all.
But I mean, I think that we're missing the fact he was the coach. It was after the football game. If we don't like people leading young people into whatever sort of religious way, I mean, it's the coach. And he's leading people in a group of prayer on the 50-yard line, which apparently isn't a spectacle. And I mean, I don't see how it's not.
The question, I think, what's not been said, and I think needs to be said, it's a question of obtrusiveness. When you say, oh well, what if someone's wearing a cross necklace or something like that, or they go off
a burqa
or a burqa or something like that. There is a question of obtrusiveness. If someone gets injured on the field, and we talked about this on the podcast, and everyone's taking a knee, and someone, just themselves genuflex and is saying as an automatic sort of response.
Yeah,
I think that's a little bit different.
But the coach isn't.
Than putting yourself on display.
The coach needs to be neutral.
So what we're arguing here then is that because he's making a spectacle out of it, it's not okay. But there's no legal basis for that argument.
But no, there is though. I mean, there's case law on that issue of obtrusiveness, whether or not it's okay to wear certain, what is regarded as unobtrusive religious garb or religious ornamentation, or praying on your own time or praying in private while still in that setting, versus giving the appearance of leading other students or creating at least the impression of an expectation of behavior.
All right, so let me ask you this under the same vein that you brought up. If you had a teacher who was Muslim that came to school every day in a burqa, fully, like a full burqa, the only thing showing were the eyes, would you not consider that same thing?
She's not leading people in anything.
It's the same thing. She is publicly displaying her religion in a way that could coerce someone to feel uncomfortable not being a fundamentalist Muslim.
She's not kneeling down at the 50-yard line.
But she is doing something that Islam, her version of Islam teaches is a religious exercise.
It's inherently different to wear a burqa versus kneel on the 50-yard line after you win a football game. Praise Allah.
No,
that's just me. I think that there's a little bit of a degree of difference in those actions.
Sure, and we can, and reasonable minds can disagree on that. But I am obviously going to side with Haley on this one. That I don't think there's simply wearing religious garb is going to create an expectation in other people that you better go along with the status quo, or you might suffer the consequences. And typically, there is a pattern of behavior here in schools where people are predominantly Christian, and they do this kind of, gather at the flagpole, or there is, a faculty-led prayer, or in certain cases where, the principal will come on the PA in the morning and read a Bible verse kind of thing. If you're the kind of person that objects to this, or if you're the kind of person you don't want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance because it says under God, one nation under God, and you have an issue for this, and you are known to have an issue with this, and you're probably the only student in that school who's acting that way, you are absolutely ostracized for it. And I know a little bit from personal experience.
But here's the other thing, too. Every single atheist I know tends to be pretty damn smart. Actually, atheists...
I know some idiot atheists.
Dumb atheists. I don't think there's such a thing as a dumb atheist, because most people who are atheists went through some period of reflection that was intelligent enough to figure out they wanted to be an atheist. So if you're a parent and you're an atheist, you should teach your child that being an atheist is not an easy path, but it's the right path. And so if you're uncomfortable because a coach goes out on the field and prays, again, I got to say, that's on the parents to explain to their children, look, this is what we choose to do. It's not easy. Just like being a Muslim in America is not easy. Being black in America isn't easy.
I think that is a logical leap that doesn't really have anything to do with the legal ramifications and just touches.
It's a separate track. To some extent, I agree, Haley. Chris, I get what you're saying, and you're right. It's not an easy path. Not being the person who is in the minority.
But that
essentially
has nothing to do with what my coach does. I mean, that's.
But the legalities when you have
the legality, the Constitution's pretty clear. I mean, we're not going to prohibit the free exercise of religion. That's what we're doing here. We're prohibiting his free exercise of religion.
The Constitution recognizes limitations on certain practices of freedom of speech. This falls squarely into one of them. I just don't see how, and I've yet to hear how, this is not a coach leading a team in prayer after the game as opposed to before it.
Because it's two different things. It's two different things.
After the game?
Corporately led prayer and people getting together and to pray are two different things. It's like going to church and being led by the pastor versus meeting at Starbucks and saying a prayer.
I mean, I don't, you haven't told me how it's different.
Have you ever done either one of them?
I've gone through 20 plus years of Catholic school. You should probably not go down that route.
Okay, but my point was was not to insinuate that you didn't know. My point was to see you have been to church. You know what it's like to be led by a priest through a prayer service. That is a lot different than, let's say, suddenly all four of us believed in the same religion and we decided, you know what, right in the middle of this, we're going to stop and say a prayer. Those are very different things.
You know what else is a very different thing? Teammates, being on a team, following a coach, having an agenda that you need to execute on this team. Like, I mean, I'm just not following any of these.
Again, the question, the legal question is, Chris, when you have someone who is a school official, he's a public official, and he is having the effect of endorsing in his role as a public official, as someone who's wearing the school logo on his shirt or jacket or whatever he was wearing, and taking a knee in front of everybody, regardless of what they believe, it carries the effect visually. The optics are that this school district is saying we're endorsing this particular worldview, this particular religious belief, and that is a prima facie violation of the First Amendment. That's what it comes down to.
My counter is, though, is that you're making some assumptions here. You're assuming that that people felt coerced, or that because the coach is doing this, the school is endorsing that. That's sort of an opinion. So what happened? My opinion is very different, right? So we get to the Supreme Court and the judges decide, and they side with you or they side with me. But that's the way legal opinions are.
But the Supreme Court has to grant cert.
Well, I get that. It may not even make it that far, but I mean, ultimately, if the question can be settled,
plain stand.
if the question isn't settled, that is where, in theory, it would end up. But it may not make it that far. So.
Well, it is settled. It's just it might get changed by the Supreme Court if they grant cert.
Well, I don't know specific restrictions on the free exercise of religion. I don't think time, place, and manner restrictions are applicable here because we're not talking about free speech.
Well, freedom of religion is, that's tied to free speech.
Yeah.
Well, they're in the same amendment, but we're not specifically talking about free speech here. We're talking about free exercise of religion, and time, place, and manner restrictions. Maybe they apply, maybe they don't. I'm not a lawyer.
And here's the the sort of the metaphor that I like to equate it to is that the right to swing my arm stops where your nose starts, right? Like just because I could hold a set of religious beliefs that involved violating your rights, and that could be absolutely a tenet of my faith is to violate your rights, and what a secular government says is, well, you can practice that all the way up to where you're infringing on other people's rights. When this person is praying in public as an official in that kind of setting, in front of students who will more than likely feel coerced if they weren't otherwise inclined to participate as well, we're saying that's a violation of the students' rights.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's fair. But here's the problem. What happens if
if you're following that all the way to the end to what he wants to do, what he feels compelled to do as part of his faith, is in fact a violation of the rights of these students, then that's where the buck stops. And that's why.
What happens?
Go ahead.
The problem I have is that what you espouse infringes on his rights. Somebody's rights are always going to be infringed upon. I think.
I'm saying it's not a right. I'm saying he believes it's his right, and in reality it is not his right.
Well, the wording of the Constitution seems to indicate he has the right to freely exercise his religion. We could talk about court cases since, but if we go to
what if my freedom of religion? What if I was in a baby stabbing cult, and my free exercise of religion, demanded that I be able to stab babies? Like, David, someone's going to tell me, no, I can't do that shit, right?
David, that's hyperbole.
And then you are offending my religious freedom rights.
That is a hyperbole, and
it's a reductio ad absurdum. Yes. It's intended as hyperbolic. It's not intended to be offensive, but we understand there's certain things you can't do. Everyone doesn't like Sharia law, right? Or Sharia law, excuse me.
So stabbing babies and praying on the 50-yard line are not the same thing.
Just as praying on the 50-yard line and wearing a burqa aren't the same thing.
I think those are a whole lot closer than stabbing babies.
But I'm saying we can all acknowledge the reason I bring it up is because it's not controversial as to whether or not we all agree. Your religious freedom should not allow you to stab babies because that's that's a tenet of your faith, right? Like, we can all agree it doesn't matter if that's a tenet of faith, you're not allowed to do it. Just like this prayer in public is, and this is where we disagree, is saying that, because that's a tenet of his faith to pray, he feels compelled to do so, and we're telling him no, he can't. We're telling him no, he can't because it's going to violate the right of somebody else. There's certainly why we delineate that.
I've ever said there's any absolutes. There certainly are no absolutes. But to take something to an absurd extreme to say that if you could pray on the 50-yard line, I should be able to stab babies, that's just dumb. Here's the thing. Him praying on the 50-yard line of his own free will, you think that it is a violation. I don't. So here's the problem with that. Somebody's rights are going to be infringed upon. Someone is going to be oppressed here.
But I don't think he has the right to do that. That's what I'm saying. That
the only reason why we are talking about this is because he's a government employee.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that if after a trial I then knelt down in the middle of a courtroom and started a prayer and tried to get other people to join and just sort of made a spectacle, my client might not like that, and then they might not hire us in the future, and my firm might fire me because of those actions. But that's totally private. We're talking about this in the government setting because we have a separation of church and state, and we don't want our government officials, the people who are the coaches, to be leading prayers. And that is happening. We don't want it before the games, and we don't want it after the games. And
never,
see us veering away from this underlying understanding, and I haven't seen a good counter to that basic underlying understanding.
Well, so, but a couple questions. Okay, so you're saying leading. Okay, I don't know that much about the court case. It's my understanding is that he wasn't leading; he was simply going out to pray, and people followed him. That's different. Your example. If you walked outside of the courtroom after a case and you sat down,
I said inside the trial courtroom.
Well, I don't care where it is, inside, outside, whatever. If you sat in your chair and you quietly said a prayer to yourself, or you said a prayer out loud, I guess, I don't guess you'd probably say a prayer out loud in court because it would be disruptive. But let's say you said a prayer and other people started to join you. That's not leading. People just chose to join you.
Well, it's probably disruptive, and it would probably not.
Right, but no one's arguing whether what he did was disruptive. This is a question of religious freedom.
No, but at the end, if I go in the middle, the jury's announced their verdict, everyone's there, and I just stand there in the middle and I kneel down and start trying to lead a prayer, I'm a private employee, and we wouldn't even be having a conversation of whether or not I still had my job was something that was protected by the Constitution. This guy is a government employee, and he is doing this. At the end, he's leading a prayer, and I don't. You've said a lot of different things, but I don't see how it's any different than praying before a game.
I think the important thing here to remember too is this didn't happen in a vacuum. This wasn't a one-time. This is a guy who, for I believe a period of some number of months or years, was leading his team in religiously inspirational talks and prayer before games until I guess somebody took notice of it and told him he couldn't do it anymore. And that's when he gravitated towards this. This is a person. There's a, what do you call it? A fact pattern that essentially that leading up to this moment.
There's a habit.
Yeah, and it shows to me that demonstrates intent that he was praying to be seen. He was praying to encourage others to pray. And this is he's the Kim Davis of high school football. That he's doing this for a reason. And again, people would come and join him when he prayed, and when he didn't do it, or when he wasn't allowed to do it, or when he was told he wasn't allowed to do it and desist. And for that period where he complied with that, nobody else came on the field and prayed, because the inherent divisiveness that takes place in a community, in a school, over this kind of behavior is apparent. And as a matter of policy, it's just a bad idea, as demonstrated by when people are doing it and when people are not doing it, as when he was leading it. And again, this is a person who is a government employee. He has power over minors, and he's expressing certain things about his beliefs and his values. And if you're a person who doesn't share those, it's coercive. And the government has adjudicated on similar things many times.
And he was told to stop, and his contract wasn't renewed.
All right. So the employment piece, like I said, is a different issue. Okay. I'm not arguing whether he should or should not have been renewed as an employee, which I realize that's the basis of his lawsuit, but
just the First Amendment stuff.
It is the point, but we're specifically talking about his religious freedom here. We're not, the right to employ or not employ is.
And that's why I said that he can do it on his own time.
So but let's extrapolate a little bit here. What if he was praying in the mall in a shirt that said whatever high school he went to?
Did he just have practice, and was his practice over, and all of his teammates right there with him?
What if there happened to be some of them at the mall? What if there were some of them at the mall?
I mean, you're talking about a totally different set of logistics. If he's randomly at the mall, go pray in the middle of the food court. But is he there with his entire team? Did he just run a hard practice? Did he just say, listen up? Did he walk out into the middle of the food court right afterwards? Like, it's not a fair analogy.
All right. So here's the thing about restrictions. I had to do a little research because it's been a few years since I was in college, but the restrictions on religion are not time, place, and manner. They really have more to do with, is there a compelling state interest to prohibit religion, and is it being done so in the manner that's least restrictive? So telling him that he can't lead a prayer officially as a coach, that's fair. is telling him that he cannot pray in public on the 50-yard line. Would you really consider that the least restrictive manner?
I mean,
And
I think that that's a gross overstatement of what the restriction is. He can go out to the 50-yard line and pray, just not after a game when everyone's there.
Yeah, again, there was mitigation offered that he could either go into a private setting and pray on his own if he was compelled to do so, or when everyone had left. So it did not give the effect of a government employee endorsing a specific kind of belief.
Right, but what if that particular restriction infringes on his religious liberty, which, again, I had to go, look at Google because it knows everything. The scripture you brought up is accurate, but there's another one that says almost the opposite thing, that you should pray publicly, you should pray to people. The Bible, that's a whole nother discussion, but there are scriptures that essentially say both. And so if he says, based on this scripture in 1 Timothy, I feel like I should be able to pray in public. The 50-yard line is public. I want to be able to pray there.
Right. But I don't think the Bible really acknowledges the U.S. Constitution and the rights enshrined there. And the other side of that is you can make the Bible say what you want it to say. You can interpret Scripture how you want it to, which is why there's such a diverse set of opinions, why there's 40,000 plus denominations of Christianity. You can make it say what you want it to say. God will always agree with you when you claim that you speak for God. And that's a rabbit trail I'm not going to go all the way down. But
No. I was just simply saying that there is at least one instance where he could claim that his religion teaches him to pray publicly.
Sure.
So if
there are Wahhabi Muslims that think you should push gay people off of rooftops, but they're not allowed to do that shit.
That's a different thing.
So, not to cut y'all off, but I just saw Siobhan talking, and I don't know if she knows that she's muted right now.
Siobhan, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
We can't hear her.
Say something.
Yeah, I think she might be muted. All right, y'all keep going.
I don't have her muted. She shouldn't be muted unless her volume's like way down or something. Siobhan, we cannot hear you. And that sucks because we want to talk about the flood here in a minute.
Yeah.
Which we'll probably agree on way more than this. Yeah, you're Chris. You've taken a brave role here.
I just want to say that I support my fellow libertarian brother over there. I think that the argument you're trying to make, I'm behind you.
What is the argument?
This coach is not leading a formal prayer on the 50-yard line. He went down of his own volition, and those students decided that they would join him. He was in no way leading anything, regardless of what he was doing in the past with leading a prayer in the locker room previously. And maybe the reason why no students were doing it on their own when he wasn't doing the 50-yard line prayer is because they felt like they couldn't. And when they saw him do it, that emboldened them enough. They were like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and join him.
I think that's a mischaracterization of what happened. If my coach is told, hey, stop praying before the game, and he's like, all right, well, I'm praying after the game. I don't see how it's different. Y'all just point out how it's different.
We've been trying to do that.
But I'm gonna have a hard time rebutting because I'm texting Siobhan now about technical issues, and I can't do two things at once.
All right. Well, Chris, all I wanted to say was I understand exactly what argument you're putting forth, and it makes absolute sense to me. So I just wanted you to know that you've got my support as I don't.
Wait, hold on.
I think we make it so much more difficult than it needs to be.
As a libertarian who is for small government interference, he has your support. It's like, this seems like something that libertarians should not be for. You all should be very much so commending the school for dismissing this person who has a pattern of trying to lead
Haley,
in prayer. And
I think you're mischaracterizing libertarianism. I want the least amount of government interference as possible. I also happen to be a constitutionalist, and to me, the Constitution is crystal clear in this manner. I think
Siobhan figured it out. Siobhan?
We're almost there.
I still can't hear you, Siobhan. Yeah, Chris, I was actually about to say I sort of agree with you on not the Constitution, but on libertarianism, that there is a value of freedoms over rights that a lot of libertarians, and please correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, but libertarians view the rights as the things that you have that do not require input from anybody else. When you just have them on your own. That's what your actual rights are, and everything else is considered a liberty, and liberties are valued over rights. Most libertarians I've spoken to.
The discussion about rights is probably best saved for another time.
Sure.
Because if we're going to really get into the issue and I've had this discussion with my atheist friends before, I think it's completely illogical for anybody that's an atheist to stand behind natural rights. Because if you read if you look back at the origin of natural rights and you read John Locke, it's very clear that natural rights are those rights given to us by God and cannot be taken away by government. Well, if you don't believe in God, you're going to have a hard time standing behind natural rights. So that's probably a discussion for another day.
Yeah, I mean, I look at what people call natural rights as a matter of ontology, that it's what ought to exist for every person.
Right, but we're talking about...
But not ordained, but agreed upon.
But that's not... If you look at the origins of the Constitution... the framers of the Constitution, where they drew inspiration from, that's not where they drew inspiration from. They drew inspiration from, the theses by Locke and others who really strongly espouse natural rights. Having said all that, that's another issue completely, because if you want to be an atheist, fine. My position as more of a libertarian is this. You want to be an atheist, be an atheist. You don't want to pray, don't pray. If I'm a Christian and I want to pray in the 50-yard line, pray in the 50-yard line. If I'm offended by your atheism,
a public employee.
If I'm offended by your atheism,
thank you, Siobhan.
Hold on.
At least we can hear her.
I think Siobhan finally got it.
But by the way, I went to law school and did a lot of First Amendment shit, so I kind of actually know the law on this. And the law is this: you can't make people pledge allegiance to the flag when they're Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right, but we're not talking about making
idolatry. And you can't make people, pray, and you can't host prayers in front of football games when you're a public employee at a public school.
Right, but but Siobhan, I'm glad, first of all, I never knew how to say your name. So this is like me.
This is a learning experience for you.
I'm sure that I have butchered your name so many times, but he didn't.
I'm sure not the last.
He didn't make anyone do anything. He was simply exercising his freedom to pray, and people joined him.
It doesn't matter. He's a leader in a leadership position, and he's praying on the 50-yard line in front of a football stadium full of kids.
Right.
Yeah, government shall respect no establishment of... Hang on. Government shall respect no establishment of religion, right? When you have a public employee...
But hold on, you're forgetting the most important part.
No, the most important part is the establishment.
Hold on.
At high school, not when you're a coach.
But the Constitution doesn't say that. It doesn't say prohibit the free exercise thereof, except if you're a coach at a high school.
No.
That's not what the case law interpreting the First Amendment says. It's not.
If you look at the subsequent case law that brings about relevant tests for this, what is the compelling interest in prohibiting his free exercise, and is it being done in the
that's not the test.
That is not the test. That's not the test. It's just not.
We have lemon law. We have the endorsement test.
That's not the test when you're talking about public schools and requiring people to pray or praying in front of people. That's not the test. It's just not. So, they don't allow you to pray before football games because it's an implication that the school is endorsing a particular religion, and you're in a position of power, in a position of authority, and everybody feels compelled to follow you. That's the problem. That's why you can't require people to pledge allegiance to the flag. You can't require them to say a prayer at the beginning of class. That's the issue.
I disagree.
Other tests apply in other situations.
I disagree.
I read this.
It's okay. We don't. Look, I don't want to beat up on Chris. Chris has a very contrarian opinion to us.
I went to Catholic school. I'm an atheist. That was a weird situation for me. You want to know how often I prayed? A lot. But I didn't go to public school. The reality is that when you see a figure like that pray in front of everybody, and you're on a team like that, you feel compelled to join in. Like,
How do you know that? Whoa. See, the problem is you're making an assumption.
I've always felt compelled to join in, and I know that others have too.
There's
tons
of case law.
I think at the end of the day, though, Chris is never going to agree that other football players are feeling compelled to go pray with their coach on the 50-yard line after a football game. I think that
it's fine that the football players do it of their own volition. It's a problem when the coach does it. When the coach starts it. That's the problem.
The coach has the same rights as everyone else.
I should point out, though, that the school district also said that the football field is not an open forum for sectarian prayer, period. Like, the school district's position is this is a football field for football, not for different people to come out here. Because what happened was the Satanic Temple came out when he started doing this, saying, oh, really, you're going to let this guy, pray to Jesus after the game? We want to hail Satan after the game. After the Hail Mary, we want to hail Satan. And the school district goes, oh, this isn't cool anymore. And we need to shut this whole thing down.
Here's where I would say that I agree with you. If we're going to let one do it, we need to let them all. If we're not going to let all do it, no one should get to do it.
Right.
I'm not.
And they didn't want the Satanists to do it. Is part of this.
Right. If we're going to let a Christian coach go out and pray, then we're going to need to let the Satanist or the Muslim or whoever or the atheist go out there and play his bagpipes, whatever. We're going to have to let everyone do it, or we're going to have to let no one do it. And if the school took the position that we're not going to allow any sort of religion, period, to prevent disruption, and he then violated that, and that's why he was terminated. I'm okay with that. I don't
terminated.
Well,
but isn't according to you, isn't that a violation of his free exercise rights?
What?
For Chris to say that if the school's saying we're not having any kind of prayer because we don't want to turn this into a smorgasbord of religious displays, and he, and therefore he cannot be out there doing that, is that not still also a violation of his free exercise rights?
It probably is, but we all know that many violations of rights occur in the name of safety, and that's really what they would always dial it back to.
I mean, I don't find that distinct from what we've been saying this whole time.
Hold on, Siobhan needs a second to hook on with her voice.
Yeah, I mean, as a public school employee, you do not have the same rights when you're acting on behalf of the school as you do as a private citizen. I mean, you don't have the same First Amendment rights to freedom of speech. You definitely don't have the same ones to freedom of exercise of religion. I mean, it's just not true.
Why? But where in the Constitution does it provide for that?
Have you read the case law on the First Amendment? Because that's a huge theme.
Well, there was plenty of we can read case law all day. I mean, Brown versus the Board of Education reversed years of unjust case law. So to just say that case law exists and that makes it okay.
Let's limit the rabbit trails, guys.
I'm just saying. We had separate but equal as case law in this country for decades. So did we just throw our hands up and say, "Oh, it's okay"? Did you read the case law? No.
No, but
100 years, that's no matter, right? I mean, that's a different situation. I mean, we've had case law for just 200 years at this point, and if you read it, it will tell you that when you're a public employee, you don't have the same rights when you're talking on behalf of the public entity. It's just the way it goes.
The case law may exist, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with it.
Okay. The Supreme Court disagrees with you and has multiple occasions.
So far. We have Gorsuch now, so far. We'll see what happens with that.
I think
to authority doesn't do much for me. I mean,
sure.
I agree with them when they're right.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're not going to agree on anything. That was never the point. It's just I don't see how a coach going out at the 50-yard line after a game, praying with the team, isn't leading prayer. And I think that that's something that we are going to disagree about. And I think that that is a key fact. I also think that there are some basic things that come with being a public employee that we don't need to actually get into. But just if you're going to talk about it, read into it a little bit more. But I do think we should talk about Hurricane Harvey and everything, because I don't think that we're going to get. I think we're at an impasse on this.
Yeah, Chris and Melissa, I obviously disagree with you in your opinions. But I respect your opinion. I respect you coming on and voicing them. I mean, this is what it's about: is having sort of, we do have very polarizing opinions on these things, but we come here and ferment, and we hopefully can at least understand each other and not ascribe bad motives to each other for disagreeing. So thank you, Chris, for taking on all comers there.
I'm used to always being that.
I don't understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, like, having gone to a Catholic school and not having been Catholic, like, I get why the law is what it is, because, like, you can't really underestimate the sheer amount of, like, peer pressure that kids especially feel when people in a place of authority are doing something like praying. Yeah. I mean, and it goes against, whatever their values are, and they feel compelled to.
Like a lot of gas stations, gas are paying up to $3 a gallon.
If you want to go down the road and get gas, go down the road and get gas.
I don't know what's going on there.
Like 3/4 of a tank.
What?
Chris, you turned off your camera instead of your mic.
You're saying with Labor Day this
he's
weekend,
having some kind of side conversation right now. But yeah, Siobhan, I can identify with that. I was also an atheist in a Catholic school for a number of years, and it's extremely ostracizing.
Sure that the long route
you either lie about not believing, or you're treated like a weirdo.
Hey, the sound's really messed up right now.
Yeah, Chris is having a conversation because I think he muted his mic instead of turning off his camera, which is what he did. He turned off his camera, but his mic's still going. And we're listening to
what?
Whoever you were having a conversation with, I'm assuming your wife, we heard all of it. So.
Oh, I'm so sorry. The rumor is that we're running out of gas here in DFW, and that's probably not true, but I was just trying to tell her if she wants to go get gas, you can go get it.
You never know, Chris, because the second largest refinery in Houston had some structural damage, and so, like, if you're not running out of gas, it's going to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah. What is the second largest refinery?
I'm not entirely sure, but I'm sure you can get it.
I read
but on to Houston, guys. On to Houston. Let's talk about this. We have with us tonight Haley and Siobhan, who are both Houston residents, and Houston has taken on a what's the vernacular fuck ton of water. You guys, some 14 trillion gallons of water has been dumped out by Hurricane Harvey onto the greater Houston area. What's that been like for you guys since this weekend?
Are y'all dry?
Haley and I actually live on opposite sides of Buffalo Bayou, which sort of bisects Houston east to west, and is one of the main drainage thoroughfares in town. So I actually haven't seen Haley in like 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Well, no, we saw each other. We've been prohibited from traveling the 3 miles to each other's houses because of water.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, until today.
Yeah.
Today was the first day that you could actually get across Buffalo Bayou, which is a really big deal. I mean, it really does cut the city in half, and there's no way to get across Buffalo Bayou.
That's like the trail of water that comes in from the east, basically. Is that am I understanding that correctly? Okay. If you guys look on your little Google Maps, you'll see it.
Yeah, if you look at a map of Houston, what's called the inner loop is everything inside of 610, which is I-610. It's a loop that kind of circumvents the entire inner city of Houston.
A beltway of Houston, yeah.
Like downtown is to the east. Yeah. And so
Buffalo Bayou runs through the center of it.
Exactly. So Haley lives just south of Buffalo Bayou, and then I live north of that in the Heights. And I haven't been able to get over there until today, actually.
I have some friends that live just northwest of the Addicks Reservoir. And water, she lives in an apartment up there, and the water hasn't gotten inside, but it's like up to her, like right back her porch railing. It's crazy.
Yeah, that area didn't suffer as much flooding from the rainfall as a lot of other areas did. But as I'm sure you all have heard, both the Barker and Addicks reservoirs have started overflowing. So the Army Corps of Engineers started a kind of preemptive controlled flood, essentially. Yeah. And they kind of pulled the plug on the bathtub and tried to prevent the overflow. But I think at least Addicks and probably Barker have overflowed at this point. So a lot of areas that were not flooding have flooded as a result of that.
And I found some old articles because I never heard of those places before. I guess they've been talking about this potentially happening for years, that those reservoirs could break.
Yeah, they're 2 of the 6 most dangerous reservoir dams in the country. The Army Corps of Engineers has ranked them as a Category 1 as far as being in need of repair. They do have a contract out to fix it.
So they basically they opened it up so that it wouldn't get destroyed.
Yeah, so it wouldn't break.
Yeah, I mean, the problem you have with dams like that
so it's useless, in other words.
There's a huge rate of failure if you breach the dam, and they were trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a 1,000-year rain, but yeah, they should have planned better, just like the levees in New Orleans. They should have planned. I mean, they should have fixed it.
This is a different situation. Like the levees in New Orleans had a lot of problems, and I'm sure Haley can elaborate on a lot of that. It's not, you're really not comparing apples to oranges here with that.
I don't want to get fired up either, so we got to tread carefully.
Yeah, they are 2 of the oldest dams in the country. Like they're both 70 years old. They were built in the 40s.
Oh wow.
But they they contracted out. They bid out this contract like 5 years ago, but it was not going to be completed until 2019, and then they got delayed with some floods. Like, I mean, these are not things that can be fixed in 6 months.
All right.
So the reality is that they did try to fix them in the past several years, but they haven't been able to complete those renovations yet. And we're talking about huge dams.
Yeah, that's actually something that in general surprised me. So Louisiana native here, and I've gone through a good number of hurricanes and everything. But overall, like going to gas stations, going to grocery stores, getting prepared for the floods and everything that was to come, everyone kind of seemed on the same page preparation-wise. I mean, sure, some people, who stayed might have didn't think that the storm was going to last until basically today and everything. But as a difference from Louisiana, it just seemed that everyone else was way more prepared to ride out this storm than I've experienced back home with the general population.
Yeah, it seems like Houston did a lot of things right. I know that people were catching flack because they didn't evacuate, but I don't know. Evacuating 2 or 3 million people, just especially on the spur of the moment, seems pretty crazy. I think that was probably.
But I mean, Houston's population is like 6.5 million, and we're not even adding in like the places that were mandatory evacs.
Yeah.
The Galveston area, anything like that. So it's huge. It's a lot of people, and so if you're going to make that call. But, starting Friday, I mean, I had gone to stores and gotten the supplies that I needed to hunker down. And today was the first real day that I was able to leave my house, not on foot.
Yeah, same here.
Well, how many people have died? Like 10?
It's a little bit higher than that, but the death toll is not really as high. Like, for instance, for Rita, it was actually higher, and half of those people died before the storm even hit because
anyone dying is a tragedy, but 10 or 20 people dying in a storm like this, I mean, I don't know how to say it the right way, but I mean, somebody did something right to keep the death toll pretty low.
The death toll for Katrina was much higher.
Yeah, I mean, and I've lived on the Gulf Coast my entire life. And I've weathered several really big hurricanes. And I can tell you that I have never, ever seen anything like this before. I mean, just the sheer amount of water that was moving through Houston this week it
was depressing.
Like, there's no other word for it. My neighborhood got 20 plus inches in a day. It was
depressing on a different level. It was like you weren't, power goes out or whatever, but it was just, it never stopped this steady raining. Like there was occasional pockets, but it was just this constant rain for like 48 hours at one point.
So can y'all get anywhere? Like, do y'all work downtown, or can y'all get to, like, can you get to your work or anything?
I mean, I was able to go to my office today.
My office is technically open today. Yesterday it was open, but we didn't have elevator access, and they cut the power to the building over the weekend.
Yeah.
Actually,
just hard,
most of downtown flooded. At least
it's hard to tell from the pictures.
Houston downtown at a certain area is really close to the bayou. The bayou kind of crests around it, similar to the layout of New Orleans. But the bayou comes around the certain area of Houston, and some of the buildings that were like closer to that crest area, they flooded. And then what was also strange is you have this high crest, and those buildings that were very close to the bayou did get some water. And then on the entire like southwestern side, completely opposite from where the bayou crests and everything, that's where you had that one building catch on fire and some serious electrical damage going on. Even though that they weren't necessarily sitting in the 4 feet of water, they still had enough water at that end to, you know, have a building catch on fire and suffer significant damage.
Well, and it's hard to get a feel for the scope because Houston is so big, and you just see this picture or that picture. It's hard to put it all together as to how much is flooded and what's not flooded. And
I mean, to give you an idea, I mean, even during Tropical Storm Allison, like my area, the Heights didn't flood. And the street outside of my house flooded 3 times in 24 hours. I mean, there was a foot of water on either side of the street and 5 inches on the high point in the middle at 3 separate times. When I went to bed on, you know, what was it, Saturday night, and then at 3 o'clock in the morning, it was drained. And then at 7 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, it was flooded again. And then it was like drained a few hours later, and then it flooded again by about 2 o'clock. I mean, that's an astronomical amount of rain.
Well, and the other crazy bit is I live on the other side of Buffalo Bayou. And if you imagine like Buffalo Bayou being a low point in town, and then, you know, the sides grading up, where my house is located is at the highest point of the ridge off of Buffalo Bayou. But there is an entire developed neighborhood in the, you know, 20 feet below me and where the bayou really starts. But it flooded up to the point where I was like, we're pretty close to my house. We're within feet of my house, and an entire neighborhood at the bottom of it, those houses had to take in at least like 8 feet of water.
Yeah. I mean,
and they're like nice Allen Parkway houses.
Yeah.
Live on the tops of hills, people.
Yeah, I mean,
I've got a question. I grew up in Houston myself. I'm just curious. Did River Oaks flood?
Yeah,
it did. Okay,
Parts did. Yeah, I mean, not like.
I mean, everywhere flooded, pretty much. Like
yeah,
portions of the Heights flooded, portions of Montrose flooded. Everyone's gonna like. My house didn't flood. Siobhan's house didn't flood. Not everyone in River Oaks flooded, but yeah. Houses flooded in those areas and all those.
I'm just curious because I'm sure you'll know that all of that flat going on Facebook. I'm just curious if Joel Osteen's house flooded.
It would be karmic retribution.
No, let's not waste our breath on that loser, please.
I mean,
I've heard, not that I necessarily want to defend the dude, but the whole thing about opening his church, I think I saw pictures that I don't know if they're accurate or not, that like his big old mega church like actually like flooded all to hell and back, like, and that's why he didn't open it, versus everyone giving him crap for not like opening his church to like help the people who've been displaced from their homes. Like, I don't really know the whole argument there. Did his church flood? Does anybody know? Like, or was he just being?
I don't know.
Like
all I know is that he drives a Bugatti, and you know what?
And he lives in a $10 million house.
I'm not denying that he's a charlatan of the highest order. I'm not denying that at all. But I'm just saying, are we also being unfair? You know, that's the nuance that skepticism forces you to tease out.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't confirm or deny whether or not, you know, his church was actually flooded or not. I didn't go over there. I don't know.
You don't
I
go
know
a
that
lot.
area took water like everywhere else.
I don't frequent his church.
You don't frequent his church?
No,
you don't go to the Starbucks in his church?
Okay, if you're wealthy, but no one who's watching this is, but please give me money. That's really his thing.
Yeah.
I would love to go to his church one day, though. I mean, why
Have y'all
not?
ever been in a mega church?
I mean, I want the excuse to buy a fabulous hat, so...
Are y'all talking about Brother Joel?
Brother Joel.
Brother Joel. Hey, rumor is he charged $5 to stay in his hotel. I mean, his church overnight. I don't know.
Anyway.
Isn't his church what was formerly known as the Summit?
Mm-hmm.
Church was a basketball stadium, wasn't
it? It still has the Summit on the side of its building.
Yeah,
it's
but
still
it
known
still has Summit written on the side of the building?
Yeah.
No, it still is.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Didn't the Rockets play there or something?
Yes, they did. The Rockets used to play there.
Yes.
That used to be
his church is a stadium.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of people.
I think it
that
was
sounds about
legitimate.
right. You see some of these things, these televangelists, they pack them out.
Very well might have been. I don't know. I can't confirm or deny.
17,500 people is what I read it can hold.
Sheesh. And I'm not gonna comment on that personally, but just with regards to whether or not, because he apparently got a ton of flack for like not opening his church to people. The question being raised was,
but the thing is, if we learn
here's the deal: is like, who cares about Joel Osteen? Like, we all kind of know he's a snake oil salesman, right?
Sure,
like,
sure.
let's be real here. I mean, we can talk about Mattress Mac, who's the guy who owns Gallery Furniture.
Right.
He opened up every single one of his stores and housed like National Guard, like anybody who needed shelter when the shelters were overflowing or they couldn't get to shelters. I mean, that guy opened up every single store he owned. And
I
on my stage mattresses that I'm like relying on to sell people, mattresses or like bringing stuff out of storage. I mean, that guy. I mean,
Mattress Mac has always been
his cell phone number on social media so he could go rescue people in high water situations.
Hey,
yeah.
There's
really people like that came out of the woodwork that were really pretty impressive.
Let's not forget about the Cajun Navy.
The Cajun Navy.
That's right.
There's a map of all of the people that the Cajun Navy saved, and it is really impressive.
Well, and what was really nice is, my Facebook, I would open it up and I would see all these people who are from New Orleans who still live there saying like, oh my God, we're seeing what's going on in Houston. What can we do to help? They opened their arms to us and everything. And I don't know, it felt nice. Felt nice to see that.
Yeah, if we were all this way every day, we'd be so much better off. I mean, I don't want a hurricane to have to come through every day, but...
Right, exactly. I think I've heard other pundits talk about moments of acute humanitarianism, of acute decency. When something happens and we get just blasted as a peoples, we come together in a way that's really phenomenal. And isn't it a shame that we can't be like this all the time? To really just be looking out for each other. It takes something like this. It takes something like 9/11. It takes something like some national tragedy for us to come together and stop thinking about, who hates liberals or conservatives and all the normal BS that we go through on a day-to-day basis. Things like this hurricane and this flood. People come together. It doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. You're going to do the right thing and help out your neighbor. Part
of the problem, too, is, and I've said this many times.
That's the problem.
People take disagreement very personally. People feel very attacked when you disagree with them.
Sure.
I feel like I'm usually on the devil's advocate team. In fact, I probably do that to myself. I don't ever feel attacked. I mean, there's plenty of people that don't like me, but I don't take it personally. I just don't. And I try to avoid ad hominem, although I end up using every logical fallacy in the book because I'm not that good of an arguer. No. But I just don't take it personally, If you start talking about my mom or my dog or my wife, I'm probably going to take it personally. But
well, then they've started the ad hominem then. But, yeah, okay, go ahead.
But yeah, I think, there was I don't know, Melissa, you may remember him, but former Speaker of the House, Jim Wright, who was Speaker of the House in the 1980s, is from Fort Worth. And he taught a class at Texas Christian University that I got the privilege of taking. Now, lots of people have different opinions about Jim Wright, but it was kind of neat to take a class from a man who was Speaker of the House and the third most powerful man in the United States. And the one thing he said was that politicians need to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. That probably is the sagest wisdom I've heard about arguing with people, is you got to be able to argue in such a way that you're just not being a jerk about it.
Yeah. Yep.
I hear it.
I think David also hit on something else that's really important, is to remember that this isn't necessarily an acute situation. I mean, if I've learned anything from volunteering over the past few days, it's that a lot of people, this flood didn't discriminate across socioeconomic lines at all. But at the same time, a lot of the people that were hit the hardest also have other obstacles that they're dealing with. I can't tell you how many questions I answered about, what happens if I lost my food stamps card or whatever, or, how do I get out of my lease if I can't live in my house anymore? And these are people that will continue to need assistance of various sorts over the next several weeks, if not longer. And I hope that people don't think that because the imminent threat is gone, that the work is done. There's still a lot of work to be done.
The work goes on, absolutely.
Exactly. And so that's something to not lose sight of. It's it's easy at this point where it's so fresh in your mind, but to remember that in the future, you do need to continue to follow through to actually finish what you started.
Yeah, I had made that comment to somebody, is that I haven't donated anything yet, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I've actually been trying to figure out a way to go to Houston because they need medical people like crazy, but my work schedule won't allow. But 6 months from now, people are going to need help. The people in Rockport that got their stuff wiped out, people in Houston that got flooded and everywhere in between. 6 months from now, when the news cycle has changed and Trump has done something else dumb to make everybody mad, then we'll still be worried about people in Houston will still be suffering. But hey, y'all turned out one hell of a crowd for him. I was glad to see that.
I wasn't there. Trust me, I had better things to do.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
There was, and it's again, this is a problem of climbing the tree.
Who actually needed assistance.
As much as anything, that Trump showed up in Texas, not in Houston, and made some comment about the crowd that came out to see him, and everyone's lost their damn mind about it. And this is where I want to.
And it wasn't in Houston.
Yeah,
I think he was in Austin actually when he said that, wasn't he?
Yeah. Okay. So how is this?
Right. It's not. It's
I was making a joke. It was just a little bit of.
Yeah, it was just a joke. I don't want to get off on a sidetrack, but yeah, it was a self-flating type comment. But that's
Oh, how shocking! How shocking!
Shocker! I didn't see that one coming at all.
Me either.
Right, and this is one of the moments, and I'm not trying to give an excuse to make a dig on Trump, but when times where it's important to have a president who's really about himself, what you do in the days leading up to a storm like this, what you do during, what you do after, it matters. It's important.
Yes.
And he's using this as an opportunity to promote himself.
It's not about you. It's about
guys. I'm about to say one
about the
thing
community
in defense of Trump.
Sorry, Haley, continue.
I'm about to say one thing in defense of Trump.
Go for it.
Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, I know. This is gonna hurt.
We've got a female director.
You haven't done it yet. You don't have to say it.
No, in 2016, during the campaign, there was this massive flooding that happened in Baton Rouge. It took out entire neighborhoods, and it was just heavy heavy downpour over a couple of days. Wasn't a hurricane or anything like that, but it wiped out significant neighborhoods in Baton Rouge. And Trump came to Louisiana, and he did a fundraiser, and he did some good there while on the campaign trail.
I remember that.
For a state that has 9 electoral votes, that doesn't mean shit. He
had a daughter-in-law who was there on the campaign trail for him, and they took a break I remember this, took a break from the campaign and was doing fundraising and was doing sort of advocacy and like you said, was there just to help out. And yeah, it was a good thing. It was objectively a good thing to do,
I will say this. I've said for years, we demonize and vilify politicians. I've got to think that even the ones we think are the worst may not be quite as bad as we think if we knew them. I think. What I
don't understand is why he doesn't have he never sought praise for that. I guess he realized it wasn't a big media sell or anything. But I don't understand why he doesn't have that same kind of attitude with pretty much everything else that he does. That was good. That was something that he did, that he didn't act so narcissistic about the fact that he was doing it. And I don't know why he hasn't done that more.
I remember when George Bush gave his speech on 9/11, people hated Bush, not quite like they do Trump, but Bush got a lot of flack. And I'll never, that speech on 9/11, almost everyone universally agreed it was good. How he acted there was good. So that's why I say, these people, when you take them out of this just political circus that they're in, maybe they are good people. I don't know. Trump, I question the things that he has said and done. Just some of it's just, I don't know. I don't know how you can.
It's not about whether or not they're good people. It's about whether or not they're good diplomats and leaders.
Oh yeah. No, I know. I agree. But I'm just talking about.
One thing to follow from the other.
Yeah. No, I know. And really, what really matters is what does FEMA do for you guys in the months and weeks ahead, or weeks and months ahead?
Well, you know what? I think Trump needs to appoint a head of FEMA, so that way.
I thought he did though. I thought as of like June or July that there was a new head of FEMA.
There is a director of FEMA.
It's an effective leader for a big tragedy.
I think there's a guy by the name of Long. I don't know his first name. But I think they have a guy now, and it's just kind of little known. To be honest, again, and not someone who ever wants to defend Trump for any reason, but I think there is an actual director at this point. And someone please correct me if I got that wrong.
Never, right?
I checked shortly before the storm had hit, and my Google had informed me that there wasn't one. I'm not saying that that's accurate. I'm just saying that that's what I know. So was there one appointed recently?
I believe there's a Mr. Long, and again, don't know the first name.
I saw some officers today helping people filling out housing stuff, but they kept referring.
You know what? I bet
they were like, "Oh, we can't help you."
Appointed one real quick.
So supposedly this Brock Long guy was appointed and confirmed in June of 2017, according to the FEMA website.
All right.
So there's a guy, but I do remember there was an article from a few months back, and there wasn't one. So it's a very recent appointment, So I could understand it's an easy thing to miss, but I think there is one. We'll see what he does. For a guy who was basically an unknown.
Well, and I don't know how much Siobhan can speak to this as well. I'm sure she will agree with me, but in what I've understood, 911 went down. You couldn't call 911 throughout the storm because
that's pretty
they're
horrible.
Just and there was and we got notifications on our cell phones that basically said, do not call 911 unless someone is dying. And there was no emergency hotlines. The best place to go to for emergency aid was Facebook, and then seeing if someone had posted about the Cajun Navy, and maybe you got a phone number. Siobhan and I were talking about how, why all of this, there is no, concerted rescue effort. She and I didn't know what the closest point of rescue that we should go to in the event that we got a storm surge and needed to get the hell out of Dodge. We didn't know that. It was HEB donating food and bottled water, and the Cajun Navy, and then the Houston Fire Department. Those were the people, and it was really just local grassroots efforts. I did not see a finger of the federal government really playing that big of a role, me personally, in anything that has been happening in Houston over the past 5 days. Siobhan, do you agree or disagree?
I think in large part that's accurate, but I think it's also important to recognize that any effective disaster relief kind of rollout plan has to rely on local efforts. When it comes to trying to do a top-down, rescue effort, manpower is too limited and too widespread, and your resources are too widespread, and the local people probably know what you need more so than you do.
Well,
so what I just say is that FEMA relies on people or companies like APD and the Cajun Navy, and local people coming out. I had friends from Brownsville coming up with boats and pulling people out of the water in Katy. It's fucking ridiculous. I'm not kidding you. The stuff that they have done, they just pull people out of houses that are flooded completely and they can't get out, and they're just random guys.
It was just weird to me that we didn't have a 911 phone number, and if I actually needed rescue, my first go-to was to look on Facebook for a Cajun Navy cell phone number.
And that is a problem. That's absolutely a problem. The fact that 911 was so inundated with phone calls that they told you not to call unless it was a life-threatening situation, that's a problem. In a metropolitan area of 6.5 million people. I mean, you kind of have to have a consolidation of resources, or at least one place where people can go to figure out find the information that they need.
And I think that could have been a position for FEMA to step in, and I think that they missed the boat on that. I mean, they missed the boat on that opportunity.
Is there no pun intended there, Haley?
I can speak to
it was a cheap one.
First time I saw somebody in a FEMA jacket was today, when they were filling out applications for FEMA relief at the hurricane center. If that was any indication.
You know, part of this, I know, Haley, you were getting ready to jump in there, but I think part of this has to do with the nature of, I think it was the National Weather Service described this as sort of an unprecedented meteorological event. The amount of water being dumped in this area is, you know, sort of unheard of before that. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Anyone else catching that?
Yeah, I'm catching it too.
I don't know, because it's going into someone's speaker and then coming back to me. So I apologize because that's going to sound like garbage. But yeah, and this, you know, and I don't want to get into a sidebar about, you know, climate change and, you know, global warming, and is that a reality? But I've listened to some climate scientists on this talking about sort of, you know, the median ocean temperature rising and having the effect of feeding more energy, you know, on a median level. Not necessarily to say that every hurricane is going to be just this bad or have this much effect.
But the fact that the Gulf of Mexico was 80-something degrees, I mean, it's bathwater temperature, and that fuels hurricanes. Like, that hurricane went from a tropical storm to a Category 4
in like a day.
Hours. I mean, 44 hours, something ridiculous like that. I've never seen that in my entire life.
Yeah, that was crazy.
I've never seen that before. I mean, it was projected to hit as like maybe a Category 1, and then 24 hours later, they're like, "Ha! Just kidding, it's a Category 4."
And
like, seriously, I mean, because the water is 87 degrees.
Well,
that's crazy.
And I was doing a reading just about like the differentiations between Harvey and Katrina, and it was basically, if Harvey had hit instead of Katrina, New Orleans would be underwater pretty much indefinitely. Like, just the amount of water that fell on Houston is, I mean, almost unfathomable.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I read. I posted an article about it, you know, about how climate change affected the storm. And climatologists say it's hard to know for sure, but they did say that, you know, that because of climate change, there is more precipitable water, and so these storms are going to deliver more rain.
There's a trend of severity. That doesn't necessarily mean any one particular storm is necessarily going to be worse than you might expect it to be 50 or 100 years ago. But the trend is overall it's going to be worse, and this is just sort of a high point.
And the thing is, out of all of the towns to handle this kind of storm right now, Houston's the best prepared. It's the best one in the position to sort of handle this. Yeah. And so, you know, that in a way is kind of unfortunate because you can't see what kind of devastating effect this truly can have on an entire, you know, region.
Yeah. And even more unfortunately, I think we're just going to have to live with climate change because people in this country are so just ignorant about it. I really think we're just going to have to live to see it and say I told you so.
And that's Haley, could you mute your mic just for a second? I want to see if that's you we're getting the feedback from.
Climate change.
Haley, could you mute your mic just for a second for me? Okay, we're getting feedback?
Well, not Haley. And I muted my mic already.
It's not Haley. Okay. Haley, you can unmute your mic, please. I'm trying to figure out what that is because that sounds god-awful.
I'm not trying to be mean, David, but I think it's you.
But I'm the host. Hang on a second. Let's let me see if I'm gonna mute my mic. All right, keep talking.
Y'all hear me?
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, no, it's still there, I think.
Yeah, there's
Melissa.
Melissa, mute your mic for a minute.
Huh? At least it's not me.
Mute your mic for a minute, Melissa.
Okay, we got feedback?
No.
Yeah, it's Melissa.
It's Melissa.
It's Melissa.
Melissa,
Melissa, you're Melissa, do you have headphones? Go ahead and unmute. Melissa, if you have headphones, that would stop that right away.
All right.
Yeah.
Because your microphone is picking up what's going on all of our other speakers, and it's giving us a big old echo.
It might be my husband in the living room playing his video game too.
Well, and it was just something that I wanted to bring a point to, was that you agreed with Chris in his earlier conversation, and he said that we had to live with climate change. And I know that you do not think climate change is a thing.
That's not entirely accurate. I do not believe in man-made climate change as much as I believe there is such a thing as natural climate change.
Okay, can you give us some of your background on that? Why you take that position?
The background is kind of going a little hard.
Well, let me go get my earbuds. I'll be right back.
Okay, we'll give you a second here. Yeah, sometimes this happens on Google Hangouts, and I don't know why. It's just a quirk of it that sometimes people's microphones will become progressively more sensitive to where like everything that we're saying is being now picked up by her microphone. It might be because she wasn't talking all that much earlier, but like it's a little barometer for when it should trigger, like gets out of whack. I've had that happen to me before on non-recorded Hangouts, and everyone else in the Hangout will start yelling at you because they're sort of like daily Hangout denizens versus when we just do this once a week for political purposes, and podcast related type purposes. But yeah, I've been yelled at before, like, put in your headphones, you're messing it all up. So yeah, it's a matter of the oversensitivity of those things. And when it's not, when the speakers aren't broadcasting to where the mic can pick it up, then it won't do that anymore. So hopefully we're gonna get that worked out, because it does make conversation a little bit untenable. And yeah, but the whole thing, and not to call anybody a climate change, denier or put some kind of pejorative label on somebody, but yeah, some people absolutely, disagree with the idea that humans are inducing a change in our climate.
What I find interesting is that Chris thinks that they are, though.
I think that if you try to put a label on me, you're going to spend a long time doing it, because I'm kind of all over the place. I'm very enigmatic. I'm
not trying to put a label on you. I'm just saying that was an interesting thing to learn.
Yeah, I think that you would find that I swing both ways politically, and I knew that was coming.
No, I think it's a cool thing, Chris. I think is skewing identity politics. That saying that you take one position, it shouldn't say everything about you, right? That I think individual opinions should be a lot more complicated than that. And I think that's cool that you at least take your own positions on things.
When I tell people that I'm a libertarian, but I also believe in single payer health care, those two things are basically antithetical to one another. But there are some things that I think that are important that, we had this discussion about, healthcare, who else can run it sort of thing. I just, and the whole talking about, she was Siobhan, which I'm so happy I know how to say her name now, was talking about
Siobhan.
Siobhan.
You're not saying that.
I was saying like Siobhan or something. That's where
Siobhan.
Yeah, I
where's
really
the B? Where do you pronounce the B?
You don't. It's a V.
It's a V.
It's a V.
Yeah, no, I understand. I do.
Oh, it is a V.
But it's spelled out. Yeah.
Like pronounce like
about
anyway,
just
to get us back on track, because I think Melissa has her headphones now. We were saying, Chris had said that I think that we now have to be kind of a culture that has to deal with climate change, what we're doing to exacerbate climate change, things of those nature. And Melissa, as I understand it, you are of the position that there is no man-made climate change. But if that is your position, then, that sort of seems as if it's entirely out of our hands. We're not doing anything to make it worse. And so we should just continue doing what we're doing, because the world's just changing and we have no effect on it whatsoever?
Well, can y'all hear me? I think I've got my settings right.
You're like 1,000 times better. It's great.
Okay.
And thank you for putting those in.
Well, no worries. Here's the thing, and I got to back up and say that I come to this as a science major. I have a double major in biology and psychology, and I'm very keen on the science. And
we got science majors here. Go on.
Whoop. So the thing about it is, as science majors, the science very rarely, if ever, is ever truly settled. And the reason why I say I don't necessarily ascribe to a theory of man-made climate change is because there appears to be differing schools of thought, differing studies. I think that the guy at East Anglia College in England was shown to have fabricated his findings. Was that the one, Wakefield, or am I thinking of the immunization thing?
You're thinking about the autism study.
Autism. There was a guy that did some of the climate change. I'm at a loss for his name, but some of the studies that he put forth was using fabricated or manipulated data. And I feel like if we're going to follow the scientific method, we should follow that to the conclusion proves our hypothesis. And I feel like
here's the thing. Here's the problem. I did a little research on this because my degree is not in science, but I was a science major too. I'm just a science geek, but I don't have any sort of credentials. But it seems that the consensus is that anthropogenic climate change exists, that man is having an impact. The problem is the consensus falls apart completely when you ask the question of to what end? How much are they affecting the climate, and what is the outcome going to be? There seems to be pretty good consensus that the human race is causing or in some way affecting the change in climate. The question that does not seem to be answered nearly as well is how much and what is it going to look like? And I think that's a fair question. If we're going to implement changes, I'm of the belief that we ought to all drive pretty fuel efficient cars, and we probably ought to have energy efficient houses. I mean, that to me is just being a good steward of the place that you live. But when you're talking about the big questions, I think that you need to, take into account how much are we affecting the climate and what is it going to look like?
Yeah, I'm all in favor, and Chris, I'm all in favor of being a good steward of the planet and its resources. That, I mean, and I think that just makes good sense. Number one, for being healthy, living a healthy life, and just being.
I agree. That's climate change aside. I agree.
Climate change aside, yes. My concern is, and I don't want to say that I feel like there's no valid concern for actions being taken to preserve the integrity of the environment. That's all well and good. But I feel like what we need to understand is this is still a very new, quote unquote, science, and we don't have all the answers. And to act as if we do, I think it's a bad area to go down into by just saying, well, the science is settled. I disagree. Science is, like I said earlier, science is very rarely, if ever, settled. I mean, we once thought the world was flat. We thought that we were living in a flat, and granted, there are still flat earthers out there, and God love them, God help them,
and that's
but God
gotten
love
super
them.
popular for reasons that defy all logic and reason.
Exactly.
But I mean, I do have to ask, what's the downside in acting as if climate change is real and caused by humans? What is the downside of acting, affirmatively acting to stop it?
Because the downside, Siobhan, is that if we enact changes at, say, the federal level through the EPA, if we enact climate bills that require all kinds of regulation on energy production that then drive up the cost of fuel, that affects people.
Yep.
The problem here's the flip side.
I mean,
and then lower the barrier to entry for renewable sources of energy.
Here's the flip side.
Let's let Chris finish, please.
Here's the flip side.
The thing is,
the flip side of that is that if we are doing things that might affect the climate, and those things then cause Hurricane Harvey to wipe out Houston, we probably should stop doing it. So that's where I sort of am, is that we don't really know what the impact of human-induced climate change is. But if there's a chance that we're doing stuff that's causing things like Harvey to wipe out Houston, then we should take some pretty reasonable steps to stop doing it. So I probably agree with you. I'd agree that renewable energy and all that should happen. I absolutely 110% agree.
Chris, how do you feel about nuclear energy?
Both of y'all say things about regulations to counter that, but I mean, as someone who works with them, I'm just curious how much y'all know about those. I mean, to really say that that's a counter for something, do you know like what regulations are being impacted, what they mean to the refining process, to oil production? I don't like it when people just say more regulations, but I don't actually think that they know what that means in practice.
Hey, I think you touched on an interesting point there. I think most of the people that I've spoken with who are self-described climate change skeptics, that normally what you hear in opposition is not so much an objection to what the science itself says as the sort of the parade of horribles that comes as a result in terms of government action, that you have more regulation, you have bigger government, that these are the results of acknowledging climate change, and those are hated outcomes. And so one becomes forced to reject the premise. But in terms of, and Melissa or Chris,
really outweigh the potential pros of preventing this sort of thing from happening.
Right, but if it ends up, if that ends up affecting your wallet, or you believe that it does, or you believe that this is edging, closer towards socialism in government, and that's something that's completely intolerable to you, you're more like, it's a cognitive dissonance thing. You're more likely to reject the idea that climate change is a real thing. And I'm not ascribing motives to you, Melissa, because you stated skepticism about what the actual results are. My understanding is that the scientists who study climate, actual climate scientists, in their theses, in their research papers, there's an overwhelming majority of consent that yes, pumping ass tons of carbon into the atmosphere is going to have a bad effect on increasing global temperatures, and that's it's a rate time distance problem. And
right,
there may be some
consensus
vagary
on what that. Well, there's no consensus though on what
carbon and how much effect it has, but we know this happens, and this will be the result. And it's
Well, I mean, look at hurricane.
We know that it's not a good idea.
Yeah, we know it's not a good idea, but to what extent?
And if you think Hurricane Harvey was exacerbated by global warming, then check your pocketbooks, because guess what? Gas prices are going up.
They are totally.
I mean, that hit
oh my god,
the largest conglomerate of refineries in the country. If you think it's not going to get impacted by that, then you should definitely check again. I mean, so that's a thought too.
Can I add something to the whole equation? So let's say I'm wrong, and I do see conflicting reports from scientists. I would not get on board with saying that the overwhelming community of scientists agree. I see that there are quite a few dissenting voices, but let's say they're wrong too. So let's say the United States just goes completely on the global warming train, and we're gonna do what we can to reverse it. We have not gotten on board the biggest offenders of pollution: China, India, Russia. Those we can't do it. If we are to do it, we can't do it on our own.
It's a bad excuse.
Hang on, wait. Don't jump on her. Don't jump on her.
And slavery, so I'm just going to do it too.
That's not what I'm saying.
No, it's not even about that. It's not even about that.
Up to the plate.
You're missing the point.
Guys, slow down. Let Melissa speak, please.
It doesn't matter unless everyone else gets on board. And at some point,
it's not even about that. It's not even about that, Siobhan. We still have a demand. We still have a demand for petrochemical products. All of us use hydrocarbons every single day. There is still a huge demand for hydrocarbons and any kind of refined petrochemical product. It's how we make plastic. And until you actually start solving the issue of demand, because that's the real thing. You know, okay, let's try to become this global warming, green conscious society or whatever that Melissa had said earlier. We still need to attack demand. We shouldn't but China, but there's still a demand. Like, there's no way to solve any of those kinds of problems until we actually attack demand. And right now, we are at this time where we're at the precipice of innovation. We still haven't figured everything out, but it's not a good idea to deny an innovation from happening. We don't need someone to figure out climate change. We should very much so encourage that. We want minds on it. This is just my soapbox, but that's how we should be looking about this, rather than saying, well, China and India or whatever Siobhan was going to say. At the end of the day, something's going on. The climate is warming. We aren't necessarily helping the equation. We should encourage scientists to figure out the solution, and we should figure out how to change our demand, because that's not really even if we went entirely green renewables, we still have a heavy demand for petrochemical refined products. And until we change that.
And I know that Haley, you're too young to remember this, but I remember this distinctly in the 70s. The cover of Time magazine predicted that in 20, 40 years, we would be in another global ice age. And here we are.
I mean, that came out in the news recently. What's your point?
My point is, we, like Chris was saying, we don't know to what end. We have all these climate scientists that think they know the answers, but like I said, we don't know. I mean, I have not seen conclusive evidence that makes me want to jump off of my skepticism train into the global climate change, global warming group.
I mean, but I think that's a completely different position.
What's the downside of reducing?
And Melissa, in fairness to your comparison, though, because I was alive in the 70s, you and I both know we have far more sophisticated modeling than we did then. So I think we can probably, it's just like the weather. I mean, the weather forecast in the 1970s stunk. You were lucky if you got a tornado warning 5 minutes before it hit your house. Well, now weather modeling is such that we can predict tornadoes, certainly hours and sometimes the conditions even days before. I think the models are there. And, the question about China and India, because this came up with the Paris Climate Accord, if you look at China and India, they're actually on track to meet some of their emission reduction goals. The problem is their emission reduction goals were not on par with ours. The requirements on the United States under Paris were much, much more substantive than China and India, because those are still considered third world developing nations. But they actually are tackling it.
And they still have a great demand for a certain type of energy.
Right.
So
the problem is
they were going to have to use certain means that were less clean to accommodate their huge population.
Right. And I don't think anyone's disagreeing with you, Haley. At the end of the day, we are our own problem. We are the problem. The problem is that we demand things and people make it. We blame the petrochemical industry. They're only doing what we want them to do. The same with the car industry and every other industry. I think the question, though, that's fair, and I guess I'm going to probably channel Trump a little bit. If you're the high school educated coal miner in rural Virginia who literally can't feed his kid or really can't even find a place to buy groceries because the Walmart just closed, and you hear a bunch of smart people saying that your coal mine can't open because of global warming, but then you hear some other smart people saying, well, maybe global warming is not such a big deal.
Which way are you going to go?
Tough for you. It's going to be real tough for you to come down hard one way or the other, but you're going to come down hard on the side of, man, I really need to feed my family. To that end, let me say this. To that end, a friend of mine that I wish he was on Facebook or would get on this because y'all would love him. He made a very, very, very good point. In the middle 19th century, people migrated across the United States to go to where the work was. They went to California for the gold. They came to Texas for the oil, blah, blah, blah. To a certain extent, they may have to happen now. These people that are coal miners, they may very well have to migrate to the West to work on solar. Somebody may need to go somewhere and build some nuclear plants.
Coal is not doing well, it's true. regardless.
I think that it's a different thing. I think that it's not necessarily that someone needs to move, but the innovation needs to change. People need to stop thinking about how do we mine coal from this place and get more coal out of this mountain versus how do we solve the demand problem? How do we figure out how to store power more effectively? How do we figure out, how to use nuclear power in a way that creates less nuclear waste? Like, how do we become more innovative in our energy usage to be more globally conscious? And I don't see why that. I just don't understand why there's a rally against that, and it's disconcerting because I don't understand why we wouldn't want to encourage that kind of innovation to be, continue to be. This is our one planet. Let's continue treating her nicely. We know drilling deep down into her for, old.
And that's why Stephen Hawking says we're going to have to leave this planet to survive, and he's probably right.
I mean, heat death is a thing, but that's going really far afield. I think really the best way to look at this situation is not to bicker over whether or not man-made climate change is a thing, but environmentalism. I'm talking about being good stewards, because those same initiatives are going to be employed that serve both goals, whether or not someone signed on to it or not. I think really that's the most pragmatic solution in our current political climate. And this is, again, it's a giant tangent to what happened in Houston. It's been attributed to, the severity has been attributed to, being affected by climate change, whether or not you believe that. It's a super bad storm. And pumping carbon into the atmosphere is bad on a local level. Whether or not it's having global impact and everyone wants to agree to that or not, we can do things to make, our environment better. And let's just focus on that, because, the consequences of that are immediate and real. But I think we wanted to hit the last topic that's been sort of put in the show notes on this thing, is that I posted on Thursday.
Or do we want to save it?
To do what? Do we want to save it?
Do we want to save it?
Are you guys burnt out? Or do you guys want to talk about school vouchers?
I mean, it's going on past my bedtime. So
yeah, I mean it's 10:40.
I won't be able to join y'all next week, so we can save it for y'all can talk about it without me, or we can save it for next go around.
I don't know if there's too much to say without you, Chris, because I'm the president of Nashville Americans United, and voucher programs are a big sticking point for us. And
I don't want to do it till Melissa's here, because I don't want to be the only one getting beat up.
Melissa's right here now. I mean,
I'll be in Europe. I won't be able to come back. I'll be in Europe, and I get home on Wednesday the 20th, and I will not be getting in until late on the 20th, and so I'll be out of pocket the 6th, the 13th, and the 20th. So I really don't think it's fair for anything to wait on me.
Oh, thanks. I'm kind of scared of Siobhan and Haley, though, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's the smartest thing you've said all night.
That's the what?
Don't worry about it.
So are we just teasing this for the future, talking about school voucher programs?
Hey, when your house floods, Siobhan, you can sleep on my couch, sweetheart.
Oh, well, I mean, my house didn't even flood during Harvey, so like.
My house didn't flood either.
I know. It's like, I know this is my God.
Haley, you're a Cajun. You can survive in the water.
For the win.
This is the sick capitalist way to think about this, but my God, our house value just went up by so much.
I live in a 1910 Craftsman bungalow, and it didn't flood. Like, that is phenomenal. I have no words for how shocked I am. So.
Yeah.
I'm not too worried about Haley. She's a Cajun. They born in the water.
She practically floats, right, like a witch.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
They're going to send her up. They're going to send her up to that alligator farm to handle.
Oh my God! My dad and I are actually building a camp out on the swamp right now, and it's like I keep on telling him that it's just going to be a patch of water, but anyway.
I said that on her Facebook. She's a coon ass. She'll be fine.
That's true.
You did say that. That's true.
It's true.
I think probably it's going to be best because it is getting a little bit on the late side, and we've been at this for I don't know, probably an hour and a half at this point. That this is going to be not digestible for anybody who wants to tune in to what we're doing on YouTube. Let's save the voucher fight for a couple weeks from now. When Melissa's back, Chris, when you're going to be available again, because I think you and I we sound like we're diametrically opposed on this issue, and I want to hear what you have to say, and I would very much like for an opportunity to speak from my end of things as well. But I think for now, let's go ahead and table it before we all get a little bit fatigued with being polite to each other. So on that note, is there anybody has any
polite?
To do what now?
We were being polite.
For being, yeah, I know. What when you get into it on Facebook, when you get into it on social media, it's automatic. It's automatic fight time, right? When you're on here, you're like, okay, you said something, and I'm like, oh, I'm trying so hard to deal with that and find a civil way to respond. And this is as much therapy for me as anything else. It's like trying to identify with real other people who I like and respect, who have views that are just so different from mine. And that's what Fermenting Opinions is about. But you reach a point where you start to run out. It gets late. You get tired. I think people would start getting short with each other here before long.
But it was a great talk, though.
Yeah, it's been a great talk so far. Absolutely.
Like I like this a lot. I mean, it's easy to be a snarky keyboard warrior.
Absolutely.
It's another thing to talk to someone, have vehemently disagree with one another, and then later find out that person is backing you on a different opinion, and it's refreshing.
Yeah.
So it just shows that we shouldn't always label and judge, and don't feed the trolls, I guess.
Right, exactly. We had Chris. You agreed with me. I can't speak for other people. You agree with me on climate change. We disagreed on religious freedom, free exercise stuff. Melissa, you and I will agree strongly on certain things, and other things that we're going to be completely diametrically opposed. And that's okay. The idea is to hear each other out, and at least be able to weigh those opinions without ascribing horrible motives to the other person, because most of the other time, we're going to agree on things. We all have the same basic set of values, and it's just the particulars that we tend to, pettifog and focus on a little bit too much.
Haley, you don't do good at sitting still, do you?
She's fidgety.
My phone's dying, so it's
okay.
so nice to finally sit outside.
Enjoy the breeze of the evening.
I keep on getting the notification for getting a 5%, so I'm like, can't sit outside anymore.
Right.
First day that you've been able to actually go outside and
Yeah, I haven't been able to sit outside since Friday, so sorry. My phone's. I mean, we've been going for a little while, and the video thing definitely drains my battery.
Sure.
So I've been pacing between my phone charger for the past 30 minutes.
Well, I just want you two to know that I'm going to go over to the stadium and say a prayer for y'all, because I know you.
You know what? Because you're not a government employee, go for it.
And you know what? Don't.
Cheers, Chris.
There you
I'm
go.
telling y'all all need some Jesus. You'd be a lot better off.
I went to religious
do not
school
get me
my
started.
entire life until I went to the University of Texas, and I can tell you, I've been an atheist since I was in
You know who got me through?
Because I read the Bible.
Yeah, you got me beat by 4 years, but pretty much the same story.
People are religious, I get it. It's just not my thing, and I don't get it. I don't get it personally. So
I
the
think
thing that got me through both Hurricane Katrina and now Hurricane Harvey was Bacchus, the god of wine, and that's been fine.
Melissa's on board. There you go.
And I think I'm gonna stick to that. But thank you. So.
I have a very close friend that's an atheist, and I'm convinced that is probably the one conversation that is pointless because it just becomes circular.
Yeah.
I think David and I will probably agree on this. It's look, I've heard it all. I went to a Methodist preschool, I went to an Episcopalian day school, I went to a Catholic high school, and I went to a Baptist law school. I've heard literally every argument there is, and it doesn't. It will never persuade me.
I would love to say, Siobhan, and I do agree with you, but I want to save this. I don't want to just throw out some kind of controversial statement and then end it without giving anyone a chance to respond. But I think it is a good time to end it right here.
I get religion, like I get why people believe in that. It's not like I don't understand it. It just doesn't make sense to me personally, if that makes sense. Like the innate feeling that you feel that you believe.
And that is something
I don't feel that. And so like the way that you were like, well, how can you not believe? I'm like, I don't know how you can. Like it's one of those things. You know what I'm saying?
And I am one of the few people who is a true agnostic, as I've had this conversation with both Siobhan and David. I don't know what I know. All I know is that I don't know pretty much anything. And
okay, Socrates.
I just recorded that.
Yeah. I majored, like, are you kidding? I majored in ancient Greek translation. Of course, that's my motto. I know that I know nothing.
Yeah.
But so that's why I do love these talks. I love talking about how I view a certain side of an issue, but I do hope that I strive to live by my motto of I know that I know nothing. And I hope I'm polite to everyone else whenever I hear your particular side. And I appreciate y'all sharing it with me. So,
Jon Snow.
What?
All right, Jon Snow.
Well,
you know nothing, Jon Snow.
I'm a practicing.
I was just saying, like, I know that I don't know anything. I also appreciate other people sharing with me. It helps me learn more, and that's just a really nice thing for y'all to do. So,
well, one of my favorite
conversations are good, and I'm trying to wrap this up here. And why are none of y'all helping me on this?
Should I interject then and just sort of speak for everybody? We've had differing views on a couple of different subjects we covered tonight. We're going to come back. We're going to circle back around on vouchers in a week to 2 weeks, and I think that's going to be a fun talk. I have strong opinions. Other people have strong opinions. The important thing is we were all respectful of each other, and we're all friends here. We're all fermenting together, and that's what this is about. Is a better political, philosophical ferment. And so thank you all for coming out. Thank you all, especially people who got significant pushback. Really, in this case, it would be mostly Chris and also Melissa. I'm
the victim. I am the victim
for being the victim, for being our tortured.
You were
triggered.
I'm the victim.
I feel triggered.
That wasn't even hard.
You guys are triggered. If you need a safe space after this, I won't judge you. It's okay.
Stop it. It was easy.
I'm not some lefty snowflake. I don't need a safe space.
Amen, brother.
Just make sure you don't become a bro flake. But
hey, never mind. I'll ask you when we're done.
But on that note, we are going to close it tonight. We've been at this a little while, so I hope anybody who tunes in or watches this later has as much fun as we had. I really enjoyed tonight. It was a good talk. Thank you all for coming out. And my name is David Papiden, and this is Fermenting Opinions. You guys have a good night.